Hello. In this module, we're going to discuss HTTP response codes in pagination. It's important to send an appropriate status code back to the developer if an error occurs. You should assume that all of your response payloads will be consumed by untrusted actors, and your API response should also include what the developer needs to know to correct the issue. Let's take a look at a couple of scenarios. Assume the following GET request returns a 404 not found. Then assume that the next GET request returns a 403 forbidden. So the user exists, but it's not accessible. A malicious actor could use these requests to determine if a user ID is valid or not. Consider returning a 404 not found for all requests to GET/users. It's also important to return an appropriate HTTP status code. Here are 7 of the most commonly used status codes. Let's take a look at some responses that you may want to consider avoiding. The first example returns a status of 200, but the payload contains a 400 bad request as the error message. The second example returns a 500 internal server error, but it also includes the version of your backend system, which could be used by a malicious actor to launch an attack. Now let's take a look at some alternative error messages. In the first example, a 400 bad request is returned as the HTTP status code, a helpful error message, and a link to documentation so the developer can obtain more details. The second example returns a 500 internal server error, but the response payload provides instructions for the developer to contact support, and it also lists a correlation ID. Now that we have discussed the response codes, let's talk briefly about pagination. You should paginate the response when there is an unknown number of results and the results are all of the same type. We'll show a few examples later on. Now, you don't want to paginate if the response is not a list of objects or the response only contains a few items. Let's take a look at another example. Notice that the response payload is an object which contains metadata such as the page number, page size, and the total number of items in the response. It also includes an array of items. One additional item to include are hyperlinks to the next and previous set of items. Lastly, the paginated items don't need to include the full object. As shown in the example, you could include a hyperlink for the developer to obtain more details about the individual item. For more information on this topic, refer to the links in the video description, and if you have any questions, please post them on our community.